다다 모델이야 지 다리리 아 사람기는 신신한게 오늘을 계획이니 남바다 언저준 남바
I would like to offer my warm greetings to everyone listening over the internet, all of the lamas, the tulkus, the spiritual friends, the monks and nuns in the Sangha, and all of my Dharma friends around the world. Today is the 13th day of our summer teaching. And as I look at it, I think that the day after tomorrow, our 14th day, will probably be the last day of the teaching. So I think that it will finish the day after tomorrow on the 14th day of the teaching. And so that will be on the 7th of September. So we will conclude on the 7th of September. As I explained earlier, even though we're finishing the teaching early, we will still have the Shakyamuni Puja on the 11th without any change, because I have quite a bit that I need to do between the two times, because I still need to revise the ritual. And then the 10th day is in China. Unless I'm having trouble remembering, is a festival called Chunzhuojie. It's the Mid-Autumn Festival and the full moon, and so on that day. The other day, or a while ago, I was unable to give a full account of the third Karmapa of Ranjun Dorje's life. I should have told it on the 15th day of the last month, on the full moon of the last month. And so I thought I might speak about it in brief on the full moon of the 7th month. And while I speak about this, it's not necessary that everyone gather. I will record it so that everyone can see it later. And so for that reason, I do need to prepare all of this. So there'll be no change to the date of the Shakyamuni Puja. That will be on the 11th. Now, another particular thing that I would like to mention today is that from today, we will recite I thought we should recite the prayer by Mipam Rinpoche, the Wongdu prayer, the prayer for gathering power. Khyaltsep Rinpoche asked me the other day, we don't have a lot of activity for gathering people, and so we need to, in order to increase our activity of enriching or magnetizing people, we need to do some sort of a ritual for magnetizing people. And so this prayer for magnetizing people is very powerful, and it has a lot of potential. And so we recite that during the break, and I would like to ask all the monasteries and nunneries to recite it as much as you can. And individuals may also recite this prayer for magnetizing people as much as you can, with the idea of helping spread the teachings, and in particular the teachings of our precious Karma Kagyu. And a bit later, I also give I would give you a brief transmission of this, and I've also recorded it. So during the intermission, you can also recite together with my recording. But before that, I will also recite it as a sort of transmission. So I'll recite that. I will give that transmission later. Oh, no, so please wait a moment.
다 전에 시험이야. 다 드린데야. 가르쳐야잖아.
Now, what we will discuss today is the account of the first council from the Great Commentary on the 100,000 Sutra. So we'll continue with that. And among that, we have come to the point of Upali's recitation of the Vinaya. So before that, before I speak about how Upali recited the Tantras, I thought it'd be good to give a brief account of the life of Upali. Now, his name in Sanskrit is Upali, and of the four castes in India, he is in the lowest class, the Shudra caste, and his livelihood was that he was a barber. Now, this statue is an ancient Japanese statue of Upali, so I thought I would show it to you today. Now, in order to speak about the story of Upali, if you think about what is the basis for our account, there's a sutra called the Abhinishkramana Sutra, the Sutra of the Great Deliverance, that was translated into Chinese in the 6th century. So this Abhinishkramana Sutra, or the Sutra of the Deliverance, it has 60 fascicles or bundles of texts. And among them, it is in the 55th that there is an account of Upali's life. Likewise, there's an account of his life that comes from the chapter on the schism from the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya. And so I'll take these two accounts as my basis. So before Upali went forth, he was a barber. He was a barber. And when he would do his barber work and cut hair, he was very detailed. And he would focus his mind well and cut his hair very well. And so all of the people from the high caste in the Shakya clan and all of the princes of the Shakya clan would go to him. He was their barber. Now, he had also shaved the Buddha's hair and beard in the past. Now, after the Buddha had awakened to enlighten, a few years later, the Buddha returned to his homeland of Kapilavastu. Now, at that time, Upali's mother took him by the hand to go see the Buddha. And now, at that time, Upali once again had the opportunity to cut the Buddha's hair. Now, cutting the Buddha's hair for someone like Upali was something different because the Buddha had awakened to enlightenment. So, cutting the Buddha's hair was not at all easy. And the reason is that the Buddha was someone who everyone revered and who had great realization. He was someone everyone worshipped and prostrated to. And he himself was from the lowest of the four castes in India, the Shudra caste. And so in his mind, he had a bit of trepidation. And so that time, while he was cutting the Buddha's hair, Upali's mother asked the Buddha, she said, "So, how's my kid Upali at cutting hair? Is he good?" And the Buddha said, "This technique in cutting the hair is very, very good. But when he's cutting it, he's kind of hunching over too much." And Upali's mother said, "Upali, when you cut the Buddha's hair, don't bend over too much and disturb the Buddha." And so then immediately, Upali immediately just stood up and he actually bent over a little bit. And at that very moment, Upali was able to enter the very first dhyana. He very easily achieved the first dhyana. Now, a few minutes later, his mother, Upali's mother, said, "So now how's he doing?" Now he's very good. He's very good, but he's now arching his back a little bit too much. And so Upali's mother said, "So you're arching your body too much. And so you're making the Buddha a little uncomfortable." So immediately Upali it altered his posture, and because of altering his posture, he achieved the second dhyana. And a little bit later, and so I said, "Now, how is this the way he's cutting your hair? Is it okay?" And the Buddha said, of course he's cutting well, but he was right near the Buddha. And so when he's breathing, so when he's inhaling too much. He's inhaling too forcefully, the Buddha said. And Upali's mother once again immediately said to his mother, "You said when you're breathing next to the Buddha, and you're cutting the Buddha's hair and you're inhaling, you shouldn't be panicking. You've got to relax and just relax your breath." And at that moment, then Upala achieved the third dhyana. And then once again, Upali's mother said, just as she said before, "Is the way he's cutting your hair okay?" And the Buddha said, "Oh, it's really good, but..." And before he was inhaling too strong, too deeply, but now when he's exhaling too hard. Oh, and he said that Upali said to her child, and he advised him, and at that moment he achieved the fourth jhana. And so in that very moment, at that point, the Buddha said to the bhikshus nearby, he said, "You quickly take that razor from Upali's hand and support him well so that it doesn't fall on the ground, because he had achieved the fourth jhana." He said he has achieved the fourth jhana, and as soon as he said that, then Upali's mother immediately took the razor from Upali's hands, and then she held him up. So while the Buddha was shaving the Buddha's head, with just a few instructions on posture and a few instructions on breath, he immediately achieved the four jhanas. And this wasn't easy to do. And then after that, the Buddha was teaching to the public in Kapilavastu, and because he said that, because of the Buddha's teaching the Dharma, then all the lords of the Shakya clan, it's like the lords and the princes of the Shakya clan, they saw the unsurpassed truth, and they felt great delight and joy, and then they had the wish to go forth. Now, if we tell this according to the account in the Tibetan translation of the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya, at that time, the King Shuddhodana called for the Barba Upali and said, "You should go to Banyan Park and shave the heads of there's the Banyan Park. So there's a monastery that had been offered to the Buddha. And you should go there and you should shave the heads of King Bhadraka and the 500 and the rest of the 500 Shakyas. They're going forth. And so when we say the Shakya King Bhadraka, what we mean is that earlier the king had been King Shuddhodana. But the King Shuddhodana, in the presence of the Mona, saw the truth. And because of that, he gave the kingship to his brother Shukladana. And then Shukladana also saw the truth in the presence of the Buddha, and he also gave up the kingdom and gave it to his brother Duryodhana. He also went to the Buddha, saw the truth, and then gave the kingship to Amritodana. No, Amritodana he also saw the truth. He said, I'm not going to do the kingship. I'm not going to say, who should we give the kingship to? And when they discussed who to give it to, then everyone agreed that it should be given to Shuklodana's son Bhadraka. So it'd be best to give it to Bhadraka, they all decided. So Bhadraka became the king of the Shakyas. But later, but the King Bhadraka himself also went forth. So it's like the royal family of the Shakyas became completely empty. There's no one left. So, when you say there are 500 Shakyans, so Bhadraka had 500 Shakyas. As I said the other day, we always had 500. So basically saying that at the same time as Bhadraka, there are many high caste and high class Shakyas who got ready to go, and they were ready to getting in line to have their so it's basically getting in line and waiting in line to have their hair cut. And Upali was shaving each of their heads. And so first it was the King Bhadraka. He had to first cut his hair. Now, as he shaved King Bhadraka's hair, then Upali became very sad, and he began to cry, and he was sighing. And Bhadraka saw this. When Bhadraka saw this, they knew them, right? Because Upali was always our barber for the Shakya kings. And so he said, why are you crying today? So what is there to be sad about today? And in response, Upali immediately knelt before the king. And he said, in the past, I had the opportunity to serve the foremost of men, people such as yourself. Now, all of you good kings have gone forth. You're all gone, but we're left without any refuge or protector. And if in the future, if we have a bad king, it would be better to die than to have a bad king. So this is what Upali said. And when he said this, then King Bhadraka said, I hadn't realized before that you had such pure thoughts about me. I didn't know that you had such pure thoughts before, so you don't need to worry. I'll do something to make sure that you don't have to be under a bad king. And so Upali was very happy, and he continued to shave the king's head. Then the king said to everyone, and said he had them spread out a wide white cloth to the one side. And he said to the 500 Shakyans there, he turned to them and he said to them, okay, listen well. Upali has been serving us for a while, but he doesn't have any wealth or possessions. He's a really poor person. So let us all of this in a Shakya line put all upper robes, all the jewelry we're wearing. And anything, any useful things that we have on our body, let's just put them on this white cloth. We're going to go forth. And once we've gone forth, we'll have no use for householders' clothes or lay ornaments. Instead, it's better for us to just give them to Upali. So this is the order that King Bhadraka said. Immediately, the Shakyans also, now they didn't take off their lower robes, of course, because they'd just be naked, but they took off their upper robes and they put their ornaments and they put them on the cloth and they gave them all to Upali. And then after that, Upali shaved each of their heads in turn. So it's not necessary to mention that, of course, that he washed their heads and shaved their heads. Now, Upali was really poor. He was from the worst of the four castes, and he was very poor. And so he had never, in his entire life, even dreamed that he would ever have so much wealth in his life. Now, an ordinary person would have been delighted, gathered up all the wealth and gone home. But Upali was different from other people. He had a rather high level of thinking, actually. And what he thought to himself was, the 500 Shakyas are all lords. They were the best people in the city of Kapilavastu. There's the kings, the king Bhadraka, all and many princes. And so they were giving up all their power, giving up all their palaces, giving up their wives, giving up their jewels, and giving up their robes in order to go forth. And if I sit here and get attached to all this jewelry, it just wouldn't be right. I'm a really poor person. I'm someone who always has to serve other people. And not okay for me to get attached to all this jewelry. This is how he thought. And so he sat with his head in his hand. He had his hand on his chin, sitting like that. And he continued to think. He said, but I'm in a really low caste, and because I'm in such a low caste, if I hadn't been born in such a low caste, I could also go forth and become an arhat. But I've been born in such a low caste, and there's no chance for me to go forth. It's like I said last year, people in low castes didn't have the opportunity to practice Dharma. They were not allowed to do the Brahmanic rituals. They weren't allowed to do Brahmanical rituals. And so for that reason, he was very depressed and very sad. Now, as he was sitting there being very sad, as it is often said, that the Buddha looks to see the situations of sentient beings 3 times each night and 3 times each day. So 3 times every night and 3 times every day. He looks to see the situations of different sentient beings. So 3 times every day, he looks to see what is the situation of sentient beings, and 3 times every night, he looks to see what the situation of sentient beings are. Likewise, the arhats are also able to see the joys and sorrows of sentient beings, their situations. Now, we're unable to see this. If we're just sitting in our homes, if we're sitting in some place, and if our friends, or we're in one place, our friends another, if we're thinking, what are they like? Can wonder, how are they doing? Are they happy or not? We can only think that, but we can't really see if they're happy or not. But the arhats can look with clairvoyant powers, and they can actually see with their perception and the way we see with our eyes. And so at that time, and Noble Shariputra knew that Upali was having a really hard time. And he went to Upali and he said, why are you sitting there worrying with your head in your hands? And Upali said, I couldn't do anything but worry. And the reason is that because King Bhadraka and the 500 Shakyas they've given up all their power, they've given up their palaces, they've given up their wives, they've given up immeasurable wealth in order to go forth. And now if I sit here and getting attached to all these things, and I'm accumulating the karma for and going to the lower realms. If I had not been born in such a caste, in such a low caste as this, I could go forth and be diligent, achieve arhatya, but I've got no chance. So there's nothing I can do but to worry. There's no way I could do anything but be upset. And so what Shariputra said in response was, in the Buddha's Dharma, we don't have any suspicions about people from low caste or people of low education. We don't suspect you because you're from a lower caste or of low education. If you really have the wish to go forth and take full ordination, then come with me. We'll go see the Buddha, and the Buddha will definitely give you the vows of going forth. He'll give you a chance. And Upali was delighted. And he just left all the robes and jewels that had been heaped on the drawers. It's like he left them right there. It's like when you spit out, you never look to see where did your sputum go. You don't look at it. So he left them there like his spit, and then he went off with Shariputra to see the Buddha. And Shariputra brought Upali to see the Buddha. And when they got to the Buddha, then first Upali prostrated to the Buddha's feet. Shariputra prostrated at the Buddha's feet and asked the Buddha, said, this Upali would like to go forth. He wants to become a bhikshu. So please thinking of him with compassion have compassion for him and please ordain him. So this is the request Shariputra made. And the Buddha immediately said, come hither. He says, this is the full ordination version saying, come hither. So come hither, practice chaste conduct. So it's okay for you to practice and become a Buddha. So come hither, it's okay for you to practice conduct. And immediately when he said this, what happened to Upali is that first he had hair. His hair just naturally disappeared. Without needing to shave his hair, his hair or beard, they just immediately disappeared. And originally he'd been wearing household clothes, his head was and naturally, automatically he was wearing Dharma robes. When you looked at him after he was doing that, it was like a picture had been ordained for 7 days. You would look at him like as someone who had already gone forth for 7 years. Generally, when you first go forth, you don't really know how to put on the clothes. It's kind of strange to look at someone wearing monastic clothes for the first few days. But he wasn't like that. In just an instant, Buddha looked like someone who had already gone forth for 7 days. And you think that must have been what he was if you were to see him. Now, Upala had gone forth before the Shakya King bothered in the 500 shakas because Shariputra had to take him down, and there was no need for any ritual, and the Buddha just said, come hither, and he had gone forth. But the Shakya King Bhadraka and the 500 suttas went through the ritual. They went through the ritual of the 4-part motion of the request, and then after they had gone forth, then after they'd been ordained by the Sangha, there's a group of Sanghas, and in the middle of this, they went forth. Then after they'd gone forth, they went to see the Buddha, and they prostrated to the Buddha. Then after that, they prostrated, the tradition in the Vinaya is that you have to translate to all the monks in order of seniority. And so the king of the Shakas, right, Bhadraka, the Shung of the Bhadraka, he had just gone before. And as he was prostrating to all the seniors, he had to prostrate to Upali. And he was about to prostrate to him. He recognized Upali's feet. He didn't look at his face at first. He was prostrating to his. He was saying, wait a minute, these are Upali's feet. And he looked up, and it was Upali. And because it was Upali, then immediately, he didn't prostrate. He stood straight up. And he asked the Buddha, and this is Upali. He's my servant. Do I really have to prostrate to him? In the past, he was my servant. It's like this, a Shudra caste, this servant. Do I really have to prostrate? Because he was the king of the Shakyas, right? He was the king. And what the Buddha said was, when you go forth to conquer pride. If you're going forth, you have to conquer your pride. Upali went forth before you, so you all must prostrate him. And then immediately King Bhadraka, because the Buddha had commanded it, then he had to do what he said. It's important not to rebel against the Buddha, do exactly what the Buddha said. And he let go of his pride of being the king, and he prostrated to Upali. And he prostrated, then the ground shook in 6 ways. There was an earthquake. There were seven earthquakes. The earth quaked 7 times. And if you think about it, it's probably the ground may have quaked in 7 times. When you talk about the ground shaking in 7 ways, it's like a symbol, actually. Because of the king of the Shakyas, a king prostrated the feet of a Shudra caste was in Indian society of that time absolutely impossible. And in that sort of a situation, because there was such an important, significant event that had happened, it's like an earthquake where the earth quakes 7 times. It's like showing this is an amazing thing. And it wasn't just the king of the Shakas, Bhadraka. It was the 499 of the other Shakas prostrated. Now, there was one person who didn't prostrate. And who is that person? Perhaps you can, if you think about it, you can guess. Who was it? It was Devadatta. It was our Mara Devadatta. When you talk about Mara Devadatta, he also went forth. That's the time when he went forth. And when Devadatta, he was one of the Shakyan princes, right? So only Devadatta wouldn't prostrate. And the Buddha saw that Devadatta wouldn't prostrate to him. And the Buddha said to him, you also must let go of your pride and prostrate Upali. But Devadatta said, what benefits there for me to prostrate him? What does it matter if I prostrate Upali? It doesn't help him, it doesn't hurt him. I'm not going to prostrate. In particular, in our Tibetan translation of the chapter on the schism, what it says, schism, it says a little before, it says a little bit more, if I don't prostrate to his feet, how does it hurt you? So Devadatta said this. If I don't prostrate to you, how's it going to harm you? I'm not going to prostrate to him. This is what Devadatta said, but in case, this is the first time that Devadatta rebelled against the Buddha. Now, he had disliked the Buddha from before. That was an old situation, but after the Buddha achieved Buddhahood, and when everyone thought of it as thinking that whenever he's saying, I go for refuge, thinking about him as a Buddha and thinking that everyone goes from to refuge, then it's that time that Buddha first disobeyed the Buddha. Now, at that time, there were many bhikshus around the Devadatta, and they wondered why it was that when the Shakya king Bhadraka prostrated Upali, that the earth had quaked so many times. So they were wondered why that was. They thought, what is the reasons? They asked the Buddha. And then the Buddha said, well, the Buddha said that it's not just that the 499 Shakyas had prostrated to Upali's feet in previous time. And he said this happened. He said told many of the events from Upali's previous lives, but I don't need to go through them all now. In any case, in brief, he was from a very low caste. He was from a very poor household. And then Upali went, and then he went forth. And once Upali had gone forth, he observed all the Vinaya rules perfectly and never violated even a single precept. So the Buddha said later that among all of his students, Upali was the foremost upholder of the Vinaya. Likewise, whenever many bhikshus would have any questions about the Vinaya or any doubts, they'd go ask Upali about them.
대야 느리다. 대야 뒤를 시외 나로래야. 로빈 취라 가게게 사데기 자게 돌래.
Now there was one of the sections of the four agamas, which were translated into Chinese in the 4th century by Fa Xian. There's a section called the numerical discourses, and I thought I'd recite it to you first. The one who stayed in the realms of desire realm gods and would not stay among humans was the bhikshu called Gavampati. The one who could resolve all doubts with his infinite prajna was the bhikshu called Shariputra. The foremost of those with the divine eye who could see all the realms in the 10 directions was the bhikshu called Maudgalyayana. The one who practiced the austerities of the 12 training with the bhikshu was called Mahakashyapa. The one who respected and held the Vinaya rules and never violated them at all was the bhikshu called Upali. Among all my disciples, the greatest, the one who knows the time, who knows things, who's unimpeded in anything, never forgets anything, who has the most extensive learning, and who is patient and able to serve, is the bhikshu Ananda. Now, as I've mentioned over the past few days, the main the 4 agamas are the sutras that most contemporary researchers identify as sutras that were actually taught by the Buddha. But the unfortunate thing is that they're not all in Tibetan. There are a few parts of them are in them. So now I've taken this passage from the numerical discourses. And so here, what's significant here is that he's reciting about who his foremost disciples were. And so here, though we've been speaking about Mahakashyapa, the one who practiced the austerities of the 12 trainings. I'm going to speak about Upali, He was one who respected and upheld the Vinaya rules and never violated even a single precept. That was Upali. Now he gave a lot of great pride of Ananda. I raised a little bit for each of them, but he gave many different qualities for Pandit and Pandit. He is like the greatest of my disciples, he said. And so this is why I thought I should show this to you all today. Now, there's another story about Upali that I'd like to tell you. One time there was a bhikshu who got sick, and when they looked at what medicine he needed, and the physician said that he absolutely had to be given alcohol. The medicine he needed was alcohol, but that bhikshu thought, even if I have to die, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to break the precept against drinking alcohol. And when Upali heard about the situation, he went to ask the Buddha. There is a sort of a basic picture, and if there's no way to cure him if he doesn't drink alcohol, what should he do? So the Buddha said, if a sick patient must use alcohol as a medicine, then that is allowed. Now, there are a lot of details about how that should be used, and I don't need to mention that all to now. In any case, Upali, he took the alcohol himself, he brought it over, and he gave it to the sick bhikshu. And at the same time, he also taught him Dharma. Now, the sick bhikshu recovered, and he took the medicine, he recovered from the illness, and because of Upali's Dharma teaching, he was able to achieve arhatship. When the Buddha learned of this, then he praised Upali very highly. He said, not only is he really truly upholding the Vinaya, but is also someone who could really understand what is allowed and what is forbidden. So it doesn't help to just sort of know what is allowed not to, but to really understand the main points. When you've got to a really difficult point, to immediately understand what you should be allowed in one situation, what is not allowed in another situation at time. So he's someone who can understand all these different variables. Likewise, after the Buddha's parinirvana, when Mahakashyapa and the others held the first council, there were a lot of difficulties and issues over whether to include Ananda, the Incompiler Sutras, in the council. But basically, there was absolutely no dispute that Upali was the foremost upholder of the Dharma, and so there was no dispute that he was the most appropriate person to recite the Vinaya. And so when the Sangha requested, then Upali did as they requested. When he sat on a throne, he described in detail the place where the Buddha's made rules, the time when the Buddha made this, the individuals involved, and the causes for creating the rules. And he taught for each of the rules from memory. Not only that, he recited all the different points of the Vinaya from memory. And so when you talk about like the basket of Vinaya, it's all because of the kindness of Vinaya. Now, when you talk about the Vinaya, it's unnecessary to mention how important the Vinaya is. I thought I would give some, like to give you some information or we all understand how important the Vinaya is, but I thought I would recite a few citation scriptures that you may not know, in order to show you how important it is. Now, according to the Samantapasadika, a well-known Vinaya Kama written by the great Buddhaghosa, it's a Theravada text. And this is a commentary on the Vinaya. And what it says in there is that the Pitaka, or basket of the Vinaya, is like the life force of the true Dharma. If the Vinaya is extant, then the Dharma is also extant. Now, this is a rather rough translation of it. Now, in Tibetan, there is the preeminent account of the Vimalasarvastiva tradition, which Tibetan masters often recite. Now, this scripture is also found in the Chinese translation of the rituals of the 101 actions in the Mulla-Sarvastivada tradition. And so what it says, this is Upali asking, Venerable One, how can we know whether there is true Dharma? How can we know whether it's perished? And when the Buddha replied, he said, Upali, it will be long as the actions. Now, actions mean the Vinaya actions. The Vinaya motions are ritual actions. As long as the actions are assiduously performed, then the true Dharma is present. If the actions are not performed and if they're not descended assiduously, then the true Dharma has perished. And so the people who assiduously practice the rituals, the Vinaya, if there are people who are practicing and doing them carefully and properly, then the Dharma is there. Now, if the people do not practice them, or if they practice them, they don't really worry about them, if they're not detailed, if they don't do them properly, then there's no Dharma. This is what it says. And so, so now we need to take the intermission. So before we take the intermission, though, I will give the transmission. This is the transmission of the power of the aspiration for magnetizing. Now, the transmission of this supplication for
제바랍제 사유엔다 dimbi세지를 디밍베베와 소아담나 가서 수야로데 왕겔리 비치들이 선배로 되면서 다말을 지디샤 멜롱라 콜로제겐 루보 망갈람 라소 당엘레 버싱 까만 술타마샤이.
So now we will have a 30-minute intermission. That was the transmission for the supplication to magnetize by Ju Mipam Rinpoche. Now, to continue where we left off, now I have gone through a brief account of Upali. Now I'd like to go through the discussion of Upali's recitation of the Vinaya as it appears in the great commentary on the 100,000, our second account. Now at this time, when they're holding the council, the Arhat said, who is learned in the basket of the Vinaya? Who is it who can actually compile or recite it? And then everyone said, well, Adral Upali is among all 500 Arhats. He's the foremost in the Vinaya. We should request him, they said. So everyone said this. And once they said that, then they immediately invited Upali. Now, he was, of course, among the 500 Arhats, so they immediately invited him. And they said, please, Upali, go up, please sit on this lion throne. And please tell us where the rules of the Vinaya were first made. And when they asked him this, then Upali did as the Sangha had asked. He sat on the lion throne. And he said, thus have I heard at one time when the Bhagavan is in Vaishali. because of the incident of Kalandaka's son, Sudatta first engaging in serious contact, the first defeat was made, and then he went through the 250 offenses, the 7 dharmas, the 8 dharmas, the Bhikshuni Vinaya, the numerical discourses, the Sutra of Upali's questions, the finer points of discipline, and all of these different, in brief, there are 80 sections, and these are all put together and called by the name the basket of the Vinaya. So I think that's basically taking the way it is arranged in the Mula Sarvastivada tradition. When I look at the way that is, I think that is based on the Sarvastivada organization of the Vinaya into different sections. So once these 3 baskets or pitakas have been compiled, then the gods and the Mars and the Nagas and the goddesses made various different types of offerings. They showered a rain of the various offerings and sweetly scented flowers. They offered parasols and banners and divine robes, and then they recited a verse. Now, the meaning of this verse, in brief, is that from compassion for worldly people, you have compiled the 3 baskets. And so the omniscient one with the 10 powers, you have kindled the lamp of the omniscient one with the 10 powers. So that is what is said in the great commentary on 100,000 that is said to have been written by Nagarjuna. Now, there's also the old Chinese, the Chinese collection of tales of the teacher and the gurus, and this gives a citation from the Mahalasangika Vinaya, and it says that after the Buddha's Punavara, it says that in a cave called the Pipali Guha, they held the council compiling the 3 baskets. And at that time, Ananda recited the sutras, Mahakashapa recited the treatises, and when by treatises we mean the Abhidharma, and Upali recited the Vinaya. And it said, this is the Sthaviravada tradition. So when we say the Sthaviravada, this is the ways gathered by according to the Theravādas. Then following that addition, there are 1,000 noble beings who compiled the scriptures outside the cave. If we look at the Mahasangika tradition, there were 2 councils. One was held inside the cave, and the name of the cave was the Pipali Guha. And so in this Pipali cave, Mahakashyapa led them in the council, and outside of this, there were another 1,000 artists who did a council to compile the dittas, and this is called the Mahasangika. In any case, the Vinaya of both of these 2 schools, the Sthaviravada and the Mahasangika, is called the Sangha's Vinaya. And these are like the basic Vinaya of the all 18 different Buddhist schools. Now, in the same text, the Tales of the Teacher and the Gurus, the Chinese text, it gives another quotation from the Sutra of the Buddha's Skillful Means in Repaying Kindness. Now, there is a translation of this, the Sutra of the Buddha's Skillful Means in Repaying Kindness, and it is in Tibetan. It was translated a long time ago. But the citation that is given in the Chinese text of the Tales of the Gurus and the Lamas is this citation is not included incomplete within the Tibetan translation. So I'm adding this to kind of fill in what's left out in the Tibetan translation of the sutra. So I'd like to show this to you. That is not quite right. Please wait a moment. So from the sutra, from the chapter of Upali, from the Sutra of the Buddha's Skillful Means of Repaying Kindness. Now, this chapter of Upali is called by a different name in the Tibetan tradition. It seems a bit mistaken there. I don't know whether it was a scribal error or the translator's error. I don't know. In any case, it should be translated as the chapter of a Pali. And what it says in here is that when you say, "Thus have I heard," there's a little bit of a question and answer then. And the question that they ask is, when you say, "Thus have I heard," when we say that, when you say, "Thus I've heard," that means that it should be something that after the Buddha appeared before. When you use the word "thus have I heard," what it shows is that it's that after the Buddha has passed away, the compilers of the Dharma, who compiled the three baskets, this is what they said. They said, "I heard this." And this is their manner of speaking. So now it's said that Ananda is really skillful in all Dharma, but Ananda, after the Buddha reached enlightenment, before Ananda became his attendant, there were many years in between. And there are also possible some dharmas that Ananda might not have heard. So how is it that Ananda can say, "I have heard these"? Because he didn't hear all of the sutras. So how can he say that he heard these sutras? So this is the question. Now the answer that is given there and says that there are several different ways that it is explained. One of them is that you say the gods spoke it to Ananda. So the one way of saying is that the gods told Ananda, the Buddha said this and that. And so that's one way of explaining it. Another explanation is that Ananda knew when the Bhagavan entered the relative mind. So generally it's like the Buddha is in samadhi. And when he then enters a relative mind, and because of that, then Ananda was able to teach or to say that. Another explanation is that we've heard that Ananda heard it from the other bhikshus. Another explanation is that before Ananda accepted to become the Buddha's attendant, he asked the Buddha to grant him several conditions. And among them there were saying that the Buddha not give him his old robes. And so you need not go to follow the Buddha to the expectations revealed to the Buddha. And he says, I want the Dharma, so I'm serving the Buddha. So the point is that the point of serving is not for food and clothing. It's just to serve the Buddha. Likewise, the Sangha members would see the Buddha once in the morning and once in the afternoon, probably. And so Buddha said that he would ask only see the Buddha like the regular members of the Sangha, not in a different way. And so also, please, the Buddha should teach me all the Buddha he has taught in the last 20 years. So he's basically saying, please teach all of the Dharma that he had already taught. So it's basically saying that the Buddha taught Ananda directly all of the Dharma that the Buddha himself had taught. And so in that way, it's okay that Ananda can say, "Thus have I heard." This is why he was able to say that. This is the condition for him being able to see this. It is that the Buddha had taught him everything that he had previously taught. So this is what it says there. So I think that there are some important points there. Now, in the Sutra of the Buddha's Skill in Repaying Kindness, this is not complete. It's just a little bit, and it seems like it's not a complete translation. In any case, everything I've been speaking about are the ways the First Council is described in the scriptures and the treatises, and there are two different ways. One of them is the way that is from the four-part Vinaya, and the other is from the great commentary on the 100,000. Now, in general, of course, there are many different accounts of the first council in in the canon, and there are some differences in between them. But the ones that I mentioned before are like the best known, and particularly the one from the 4-point Vinaya and the one from the Great Commentary on the 100,000 seem more reliable and authoritative than the other ones. And so this is the reason why I have taught them. So now I'd like to speak about the contemporary scholars' analyses of the First Council and how they researched. So I thought I'd talk about this in broad strokes. When they look at the explanations of modern scholars, I think I'd like to speak about 3 different points today. The first is what was the aim of the First Council. The second is what is the location and the time of the First Council. And the third is who participated in the council. So these are the 3 points I'll speak about today. The first is the aim of the First Council. No, there are 3 different positions on the aim of the First Council. The first position is that after the Buddha passed into parinirvana, some people gloated over it. And because of that, Mahakāssyapa then gathered all of the Buddha's instructions in order to allow the teachings to remain. So that's the first explanation. Now, the primary one who teaches this is the Japanese scholar Umada Gyoke. So Umada Gyoke, and what he says is that when we look at it and try to hypothesize about what happened, when the Buddha was about to pass into parinirvana, the Mahakāssyapa and 500 bhikshus were traveling from the area of Pava to Kushinagara. And as they were going on the way, they met a non-Buddhist who was carrying a flower. Now, there's a French scholar, Etienne Lamotte. So what Etienne Lamotte says, they met a non-Buddhist of the Ajivika sect. So they met a non-Buddhist, is what he says. In the case, he was a non-Buddhist, and among the non-Buddhists, he was a Jain. So only then, when they met him, they learned that the Buddha had passed into parinirvana, and that it had been 7 days since the Buddha had passed into nirvana. So when they heard that the Buddha had passed away, those in the Sangha who were free of desire, they didn't worry about it much. They thought this is the nature of impermanence, and they sat and they contemplated impermanence. But those who were not free of desire, they felt strong grief and they cried. And Goshipa, in order to console these bhikshus, he taught them about how all composites are impermanent, and the end of gathering is parting. And he consoled them in this way. But at that time, there was a bhikshu who had gone forth at an old age. He had already been quite old when he went forth. And the French scholar Lamotte says that the bhikshu was named Upananda. And so he says that there was this bhikshu Upananda. In any case, this bhikshu said to all of the bhikshus who were gathered at that time, when the Buddha was alive, the Vinaya discipline was too strict, and we didn't have any freedom to do anything. So from today on, now we can do whatever we like. And it says like that the Buddha passing into parinirvana was something they should rejoice in. When Mahakāssyapa saw this incident, what he said was, it's only been 7 days since the Buddha passed away. But ignorant bhikshus like this are saying such deluded things. If it continues, and before long, there'll be more and more incidents that violate or go against the Dharma. So after he thought about many things, then he thought that at the time when the actual disciples of the Buddha were still present, they should all gather and take all the Dharma and Pith instructions left by the Buddha and gather them up and determine what they actually are. And if they're able to determine them, then the people of the future would not be able to teach the Dharma improperly. And there would be the danger that other people would be able to make up things or corrupt the Dharma, and there would be many incidents that go against the Dharma. So his primary aim was, as this Japanese scholar says, the main aim was that after the Buddha had passed into Parinirvana, bhikshus such as Upananda had thought that the Buddha passing into Parinirvana was a good thing, and because of that, Mahakashyapa decided to gather the words of the Buddha in order for the Buddha's teachings and the Vinaya rules to remain stably. The second position is if the Buddha is just sort of left as if they don't do anything to take control or ownership of it, then it would disappear like a rainbow. And in the future, there would be more and more charlatans who'd lie and say the Buddha said this or the Buddha said that. And so for that reason, we absolutely have to gather the Buddha's words and really establish what the teachings of the Buddha are very, very accurately. Now, the one who says this is the Japanese scholar Hirakawa Akira. What he teaches is that after the Buddha's parinirvana, Mahakashyapa realized that if they were to leave the Dharma taught by the Buddha as it is without changing and doing anything, it would disappear like the rainbow. So this is the fear he had. Now, some scholars say that the one aim of the scholar is so that the actual words of the Buddha would not be corrupted by false or made-up explanations, so that there wouldn't be any charlatans who corrupted it. So this is the reason why they held this. So this is what some scholars say. Now, the third position is that some people said, oh, finally we have been freed of this uncaring teacher who doesn't care anything about us. And it's because of seeing that, because of them speaking disrespectfully like that, the Mahakashyapa decided to hold the council. Now, the one who says this is the Indian scholar S.R. Goyal. In his thought, there is a bhikshu named Upananda who was trying to console the bhikshus who are grieving the Buddha's parinirvana. And what he said when trying to console us, this teacher, is he didn't care about us. He had no compassion for us. And so now we're freed from him. Before that, he never had any thought for us, any compassion for us. He said, you have to do this, you can't do this, you may do that. He had too strict, he said. And so he said many such disrespectful things. When Mahakashyapa heard him saying these disrespectful things, he's thinking, what is this audacious person saying? We need to compile the Buddha's teachings in order to protect the purity of the true Dharma. Otherwise, these audacious people won't do anything. So this is why Mahakashyapa did this. And so at first, Mahakashyapa didn't have any thought of compiling the teachings, but when there's a picture like Upananda is saying such audacious things that he just couldn't say that there's no choice but to hold council. And so he had the strong feeling that there was no choice but to hold a council. Now, the second question is the location and the time of the council. Now, there are also several different positions on this, and the first of these is the Japanese scholar Umeda Gyoke. Now, the way he describes is a little bit strange, and so I'm going to explain what he says. So what he says is that first the Buddha passed away, and then Shariputra and Margalina passed away. So then Mahakashapa is going to the place where the Buddha had passed into nirvana and cremated his remains. And after that, he suggested to the Sangha that they should go to Rajagriha to compile the Buddha's words. And when he offered this suggestion, everyone in the Sangha agreed. And they went to Rajagriha. Now, there is an English scholar, A.K. Warder. What he says is that the reason why they held the council in Rajagriha, his idea is that, I'm not sure that it's, what Warder says is that the reason for holding it in Rajagriha is that several scholars have this idea, because Rajagriha was a very large city. Because in such a large city, they would have to stay in a single place during the first council, and there would have to be a lot of people gathered for it. And if you need to gather so many people for such a long time, it'd be easier to do this near a large city. So this is why they held it in Rajagriha. So this is what's so Warder says that several other scholars hold this. In any case, the Japanese scholar Yoke, what Umada Yoke says is Mahakashapa made the suggestion to the Sangha that it would be best to hold the first council compiling the teachings in Rajagriha, and so they went. Now, at that time, the king of Magadha was Ajatashatru. Now, at first, he was not a Buddhist. He'd killed his father. He was not really a Buddhist, but later he felt regret and became Buddhist. And so he sponsored them. And so outside of Rajagriha, there is a mountain called Mount Vebhara. And on that mountain, there is a cave called the Saptaparana cave, the 7-leaf cave. And they made a monastery in that cave. And this was a place, and so they made a place for the Sangha to gather. The time that they began, they did it in the summer after the Buddha had passed away. And within the summer, it was in the second day of the second month of the summer. So he says that this would have been about June 17th. So this is according to the Japanese scholar Yoke. Now, the second explanation or position about the location and the time of the council is according to S.R. Goyal. His position, Goyal's position, is that there is an Indian scholar named N. Dutt. So he follows him in saying that that there are 4 stages after the Buddha passed away. The Sangiti, or the group recitation. It can be a council or a group recitation. In any case, after the Buddha's parinirvana, there are 4 stages of this group recitation or council. So these show 4 different stages of the improvement or development of the Buddha's canon. Now, according to the accounts, the Pali literature, the first council was held after the Buddha passed into parinirvana. And the location was in Rajagriha under the patronage of King Ajatashatru. And the time when they held it was during a rains retreat. And this was 3 months after the Buddha passed into parinirvana. This is because the Buddha had passed away in the 2nd month of the year. The rains retreat began in the 4th month, and the recitation began in the 5th month. And so for this reason, the recitation or the council occurred in the 5th month and the 3 months after the Buddha passed away. Now, along the 11th section of the Kantaka, the Theravada Vinaya text, This is how it is explained there. Likewise, what is also given in the Sri Lankan histories of the island and their great histories and so forth. And these also describe the first council. Likewise, there are also the Chinese pilgrims such as Fa Xian, and like the Tang Xuncang, and Master Yi Jing, and many other Chinese pilgrims wrote in their accounts of their travels about the first council. And so I think that this is the most reliable or the most authoritative, believable account of the first council. Now, the third account is the account of the Frenchman Etienne Lamotte. Now, what Lamotte says is that after Mahakashyapa and the Sangha had the discussion, they all went in the summer to gather at Rajagriha, the capital of Magadha, under the king Ajatashatru. And then they basically went there to hold the council to compile the Dharma and the Vinaya. First they decided to do this. Then not only did they decide to do it, they then actually arrived in Rajagriha. When they arrived there, they first spent the first month of the rains doing all the preparations. And then they began in the second summer month to hold the council. And so this is about the location and the time of the council. So now who are the participants in the council? Now there are again three different positions here. There's the Japanese scholar Gyoke. Says that there were 500 arhats, including Mahakashyapa. So 500 arhats, and they were led by Mahakashyapa. The French scholar Lamotte says that there is Mahakashyapa. Then in addition, there are 499 bhikshus. And then you add Ananda. So you basically have 501 bhikshus. So this is how Lamotte says it. Now, the Indian scholar Goyal says, so if we look at our normal accounts of this, that at that time, among the bhikshus, they chose 500 bhikshus from a large gathering of the Sangha. They selected 500 people who participated in the council. And he says that this is one of the most well-known accounts. But when they first chose the 500, Ananda was not included. But some people suggested that even though Ananda was not an arhat, he had heard a lot of Dharma teachings from the Buddha, and he had a great certainty in the Dharma and the Vinaya. And so therefore, he absolutely had to be included in the council. And so for that reason, in the end, Mahakashyapa accepted that he should allow Ananda, and he included him among the participants in the council. But there's another explanation, is that before Ananda participated in the recitation, they said that he achieved arhatship. But some sutras say that after Ananda had recited the sutras, he had several difficulties. However, this Indian scholar says that there's the history of Sri Lanka, there's the great history, and there's Buddhaghosa's Samantapasadika, that a very well-known commentary on the Vinaya, and then also the text called the Mahavamsa. And these do not include any account of accusations against Ananda. And so he has some doubts about the accusations of Ananda, whether Ananda was actually accused or not, were his offenses listed or not. He doubts that they were. And this is what he says. So I think this is what I have to say for today. Now, as I said before, tomorrow's a day off, and the day after tomorrow, will be the 14th day, will be the 14th day of our teaching. And so I think I will be able to complete it tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. And after we finished it the day after, then several days after that, for several days, you'll have some days off. There will be no teachings. And then on the 11th, we will have the Shakyamuni Puja. And so this is the schedule. So thank you.